All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. I just want to welcome everyone to our weekly live show. We're going to break down just some of the most interesting and important issues in crime and police news that happened recently and, most importantly in the last week. Just so everyone knows, if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel just so, especially when we do these live events, want everyone to know exactly when we're coming on so everybody can participate. We typically do these on Fridays around lunchtime. So again, just want to welcome everyone in. Please subscribe to the channel and share it as well if you haven't already. My name is Daniel. If you want to go ahead and follow me, please do that over at Police Law News on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and everything else. Just want to welcome everybody in, just checking to see where everybody is from. Looks like we have a couple people from Arizona so far. And just like we do every week, as I'm going through some of these stories, if you have questions, if you have comments, maybe in the last few minutes there's some new information that came in that I'm just not aware of. So definitely put it in the chat so we can interact and go back and forth. And I definitely love answering questions, and what I love the most is if you challenge me. So if you think I said something that isn't correct, definitely put it in there in the chat so we can go back and forth, because embracing honest debate is absolutely the most important thing. So the one thing that is kind of developing right now that, who knows, it might actually come out while we're on live, is that Elizabeth Holmes. So she's the woman who started that healthcare company, Theranos, years ago. So she's looking at 20 years in prison, and the sentence is she was found guilty in all the fraud charges. So her sentence is supposed to come out sometime today. So it's possible that while we're on the live, it might come out. However, so I just want to make everybody aware of the Elizabeth Holmes trial. Might come out sometime today. And so she's looking at somewhere between 15 to 20 years. So millions. Yeah, Lou Scun says, the fake deep voice chick. Yeah, that's probably what she's best known for. That and being on the cover of Forbes magazine. All right, so the first, Connecticut here, awesome, good to see you. So one of the first cases that we're going to talk about, and unfortunately this week, we just don't have a lot of happy cases, but we got to talk about what is really happening in the world of law and police and news. And the first case I want to talk about happened on Wednesday of this past week, the 16th, in Los Angeles County, California. So there were a group of police cadets. And just so everyone knows, just so you're familiar with it, when you're in the police academy, you are considered a police recruit. Now, most police academies are, somewhere between 4 to 8 months. When I went through the police academy, it was 6 months. That's a lot of times what the initial training is in the police academy, somewhere around 6 months. And what's common back then and even now is almost every morning you go for a run. So as police cadets, you get up really early in the morning. A lot of the time it's still dark outside. You put on reflective traffic vests, you run in formation. Everybody has to stay together. And we used to do somewhere between 3 to 5 mile runs. They actually weren't that long. But so that looks like that's what happened on Wednesday morning. So early on Wednesday morning, Los Angeles County, this happened in Los Angeles County, and there were essentially recruits from many different police departments. So I think most of them were from LA County, but they also had, recruits from other agencies who were essentially using the Los Angeles County Police Department, their academy, as a training ground. So there were a total of about 75 police recruits who were running. There were also 2 marked police cars that were kind of escorting the 75 officers in training, recruit officers who were running. As they were running, and this is captured on surveillance camera video, and it's absolutely just a horrific thing. As the officers in training were running, a vehicle came driving down the wrong way on a one-way road and essentially just crashed and slammed into the entire group of people. Watching the video and listening to the sheriff Villanueva over in LA County, it seems like the first few officers were able to see this car coming towards them, and they were able to jump out of the way. However, many officers got struck. The last updates that we're hearing that I saw a couple hours ago is that 25 of the 75 officers were injured. 16 have serious injuries, and some of those in 4 are actually still in critical condition right now and are kind of touch and go. Also, it says some of the reporting that we're getting is that when it comes to like exactly what are those critical and serious injuries that these, potential police officers are facing, is that some of them have serious head trauma. They might lose some limbs, arms, and legs. And these are people who, wanted to dedicate their life, become police officers, and were in training to learn how to serve and protect their community. And for someone to do this, it's an absolutely horrific thing. Now let's talk about the driver. He's a 22-year-old man named Nicholas Gutierrez. And so he was driving the wrong way on a one-way. He did suffer minor injuries, but nothing major to him. Police officers on scene, so luckily, the one thing that was lucky is that this happened essentially right in front of a fire station. So the firefighters, paramedics who were in the station were actually able to come out and assist the officers who were injured really quickly and probably save some lives and save some injuries just because the response time was so fast. What also happened is, so obviously after this, the driver was detained by police. There was an investigation. Some of the surveillance video that I've seen does show some of the field sobriety tests, but really what we want is body cam footage to come out to really do a good analysis. But at least what's being reported is that Mr. Gutierrez, he passed the field sobriety test. They also gave him, because there was a crash with injuries, they also did give him some chemical tests. So there was a breath test that was given that registered at a 0.00. So at least there's evidence that he was not intoxicated by alcohol. However, it's also being reported that there was some evidence of marijuana use. I believe that there was some marijuana inside of the vehicle that was being reported as well, which federally, you could have issues, but California, like many states, marijuana is a legal recreational drug. Now, just because it's a legal recreational drug, just like alcohol, you cannot drive while under the influence of any of these substances. So what ended up happening is that he was charged with attempted murder on a police officer. He was charged with those crimes. One of the reasons why is at least there's some evidence, at least from what the sheriff is saying, is there's some evidence that it was intentional. So what is being reported, and you can kind of see it in the surveillance video, is that he was traveling approximately 30 miles an hour. And as he approached this group of, 75 people, he accelerated. So they are taking that as some type of intent, along with whatever other evidence they might have or questioning him, but they charged him with attempted murder of police officers, and his bond was $2 million. However, last night at about 10 p.m., they released him. They let him go. So there's actually a statute in California that essentially says that if you charge someone with homicide or murder or attempted murder, one of these very serious violent crimes, but you still want to continue the investigation, there's a way to keep those charges pending, but for the police department or the sheriff's office to actually release the individual. So that's what they did. They essentially released him last night. So he's free right now. He's released, but the charges are still pending. When questioned about that, Sheriff Villanueva said that this is a complex investigation and that they definitely right now have enough for probable cause, which is the standard for arrest. However, they wanted to work towards and build a solid case before, he goes back into custody of having proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So if anything, this seems like the sheriff's office and the investigators aren't just keeping someone in jail on an arbitrary basis. However, they really want to try to build a case with actual evidence before they take away Mr. Gutierrez's freedom any more than they already have. I think that's probably the right thing to do. Now, we have to think, well, what other evidence might they be waiting for? We know that there was a crash. We know that there were injuries. If he accelerated as he was going towards them, that could be evidence of intent of the attempted murder. Why in the world? What else are they waiting for? So, the sheriff hasn't said, but let's look at this a little bit. The couple things that they might be waiting for are, again, we have 4 officers who are still in critical condition. Hopefully not. Obviously, hopefully they all survive. But if one of them does die from the injuries, that would be a more serious charge. Also, and this is my biggest guess, is that they're waiting for the results of a blood test to see exactly what, if any, drugs were in the system. Because they know that there's no alcohol. A breath alcohol test that can be administered, and those results are immediate. However, when it comes to blood tests for substances like marijuana or prescription drugs or illegal drugs, sometimes that could take days, it could take weeks, it could take months. Now, this is obviously a high-profile case. I would not expect this to take months, but yeah, getting the blood results, not only could it take weeks, but then to look at what the blood results are, to have someone from some type of a scientific lab or a scientist be able to say, yes, this amount of marijuana or whatever medication or drug would actually impair someone. So it's possible that those are the type of evidence that they're actually waiting for before they take him into custody again, or they ramp up the charges against him. So we will keep on that, and our thoughts are going out to all of the officers and their families who were injured by this horrible and just absolutely senseless case. Let's see if we have any comments on this case. No one has, let's see, Q-Ball says, marijuana stays in your system for a month, LOL. Yeah, Q-Ball, I can't see. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. You're 100%. Marijuana can stay in your system for a really long time. What I think what you mean by that is, you can do a hair test or blood test, and it'll show traces of marijuana in your system. However, I think there's a way for, again, this is why it's far more complicated than alcohol. And that's why states have, when it comes to driving drunk and alcohol, the legal limit is 0.08. Well, there is no, per se limit or legal limit for marijuana. So that's why you can't just have 0.08. You are considered to be intoxicated. You're assumed to be intoxicated per the law. That isn't the case with marijuana. In cases with drugged driving cases, I'm not saying this is the case here, but in other drugged driving cases, you actually have to have a scientist, a doctor, a chemist to say, yes, this is the level, not just that was in their system total, but this is what was active in their system at the time, and that amount would reasonably impair someone to drive a vehicle. So drugged driving cases, drug recognition expert cases, for those of you who've gone through that kind of training, those are far more complicated cases. Let's see. Any other comments about that? Some people's are out loose, skunked. Some people are out in a few days, and others can stick around for 6 weeks. Yeah, absolutely. The marijuana, it's a different thing. It could stay in people's systems a different amount of time. There's a lot of different factors in that, so it could be more complicated. So my guess is that the sheriff's office is waiting for some of that evidence to come in to have a concrete case. Again, the sheriff said they definitely have probable cause to arrest, but they're just looking for that evidence to have solid evidence that is beyond a reasonable doubt before they go forward with charges. And I'm never going to criticize a police department for being a little bit cautious and making sure that they have enough evidence to convict someone before they put someone behind bars. I am totally good with that. So that's the first case that I want to talk about. And again, hoping for a quick recovery for all of those potential officers. That has to be absolutely terrible. Next case I want to talk about, and this is a strange case, just like a lot of cases, and this is one where it happened in Idaho, and even now, we have more questions than we have answers. So this was at the University of Idaho, and there was an off-campus house. This happened the past week. There's an off-campus house where I believe 6 young students, all in their early 20s, were living. Well, earlier this week, an individual, we think it was just one individual, we're not sure, went into this off-campus residence and stabbed to death 4 of these young college students. Just stabbed them to death. That's what their injuries, that's what the evidence says that their injuries are, that they died of stab wounds. There were 2 different individuals, residents, roommates in the house or in the residence that weren't injured at all. And here, some of the information that we're getting from police, and a lot of times it's the reason why accurate information from the police doesn't always get to the public, and that's for a couple reasons. First of all, the police simply might not know. So if they don't know, they really shouldn't tell us. Also, since there is no suspect in custody, they might sometimes, police officers give false information to the public, to the news media, because they're hoping somehow in the investigation that it's going to draw out the offender. Also, they might say things that they think are true at the moment, but then they could get more evidence and it ends up not being true, so they have to correct their story. So there's a lot of it, and it's kind of like the telephone game that we've talked about before. So you have stuff that comes from witnesses to a police officer to the news media, and then even if accurate information gets to the news media, what's actually getting down to us? Is there any spin on that, or is there any politics at play with that at all? Anyway, so that's why some of the information in this case seems to be changing. What we know for sure is that there are 4 young dead college students, and at the time, there were 2 other students, residents inside the house, who police are saying were not offenders, they were not held hostage, and they were not victims themselves of this in any way, which seems strange because you would think that if someone is being stabbed, there would be, some loud noises, evidence of a struggle, that somehow other people inside the residence, would hear what's going on. And, the reason why that there's some evidence that maybe they didn't know what's going on is because all what the police are saying is that this happened sometime really late at night, like sometime, around 3 o'clock in the morning. However, there wasn't a call to police to come and investigate or that someone, had been stabbed until noon the next day. So these are just a lot of questions that we have to do now. Is it possible that the 2 other roommates who were there were sleeping, that they're heavy sleepers, that their rooms are in a far area or in a different floor of the residence, and that's why they didn't hear anything? Sure. I mean, of course that's possible. What we're hearing from the police department is that the 2 other roommates, they actually are cooperating with police officers. It does show, so the last 2 of the individuals who were killed, they are on surveillance camera video from a food truck at about 1:40 in the morning. And what the business owner who helped them at the food truck, and then also what's on the evidence, what the police are saying on that video, is that at least those 2 people, they ordered some food, and they don't appear to be in distress in any way, shape, or form. So what happened, an hour to an hour and a half after that is just really just a mystery. There's no one in custody and there's no public suspect. At first, the reasonable questions that people had are, well, are we safe? This is a college community. It's a college town. Are we safe? So at first, the police department put out a statement where they said, that no one is in danger, that, there's no greater danger to the public, which, again, when you have 4 people stabbed and no suspect in custody, that seems strange to say that no one's in danger. However, as of last night, the police department has actually changed that, and they said that yes, that everyone needs to stay vigilant and that there could be a danger to the public. My understanding is that because there's the Thanksgiving holiday coming up, that a lot of the students who, go to school there but live in other places, they've all left the campus, and essentially the campus is like a ghost town right now. So we will keep updated on that case because we need to get someone in custody for that, and hopefully there's more going on behind the scenes with the police department. One thing that I saw interesting on this is, how a lot of times when these cases happen and they're unsolved, is that, these sleuth detective people who are not real detectives, but, they're like internet sleuths where they just take on these true crime cases and they just try to investigate it themselves, kind of like the Gabby Petito case, and there were others as well, where, communities of people try to get together and do independent investigations. Apparently that's happening in this case as well. So no matter who solves this case, hopefully we can find the offender and get them into custody. Let's read another comment from Lou Skunked. This is why it's so difficult to get marijuana legalized, because we are running into numerous issues with measuring the volume in a person's body. Then we have to create laws around it, not an exact science. Yeah, you are absolutely 100% correct. Yeah, which is, again, why doing impaired driving cases, at least not from police officers and from prosecutors, doing an impaired driver case from the standpoint of someone being impaired by drugs, illegal or prescription, as opposed to alcohol, is just far more difficult and far more complicated there. And the science and the laws just haven't caught up with marijuana being legalized, but it seems like it's being legalized everywhere. So hopefully those advances in the scientific and legal community and in the police world do come about, because that's incredibly important. If we're going to have marijuana legalized, which I think it should be, we have to have the only thing we have to have is that, along with that is reasonable laws to make sure that people aren't driving while they are impaired. Let's see. CRU, let's see. what happened to my body, my choice, but the government should stay out of it. Yeah, so let's take that comment a little bit further. I think we talked about that last week, how, on a lot of people say my body, my choice, but they don't really believe it. You have the people on the left who've been saying my body, my choice forever, and the people on the right kind of mocked them. And then when COVID came along and there were vaccine mandates, you had the exact opposite. You had people on the right saying my body, my choice, and people on the left mocking them. So this is the same kind of thing when it comes to marijuana. You typically have more people on the left who are saying my body, my choice. You shouldn't throw me in a cage because of what I put in my own body, which I tend to agree with. So I guess where I'm at on this is the argument of my body, my choice. I actually think it's a convincing argument. But I believe it when it comes to the pro-choice stuff, when it comes to the vaccine mandate stuff, and when it comes to marijuana. If you are doing something that isn't hurting someone else, especially like marijuana, as long as you're not driving on it, I don't think the government should throw you in a cage for consuming a substance. Let's see. Loose Skunk, one more comment. Many folks don't understand that as a lot of police officers, they want marijuana legalized. It will make our jobs much easier to not have to enforce these outdated laws. Lou, that's 100%. You are absolutely correct. Like, there are very few, if any, police officers who are just all ramped up and excited about enforcing a law that everybody knows is absolutely ridiculous. No one is excited about that. Yes, so if marijuana were legalized and police officers didn't have to deal with it or mess around with it, I believe, unless you work for the DEA or something like that, most police officers would not oppose that, because what a lot of police officers want is they actually want less laws but more effective laws. So the people who are committing like actual crime and actually hurting people, yeah, we need really tough laws for them. But a lot of the ridiculous laws, you probably shouldn't be calling the police because your neighbor's trash cans are parked in front of your driveway or something, right? So that's how a lot of police officers think. Lou Stark, I think you are absolutely correct. So the next case I want to talk about, and this is going to be police related, maybe on the federal level, but it's what happened with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. I just want to start off by saying that Sam Bankman-Fried, he was the founder, CEO of FTX cryptocurrency, and essentially he went bankrupt. The company went bankrupt. They filed for bankruptcy on November 11th, and just about billions and billions of dollars of customers and investors' money just evaporated overnight. And this case has a lot of ins and outs. So I'm going to start off by saying that Sam Harris has a podcast. He has a couple podcasts. One of them is called Waking Up. I really like Sam Harris. So if you know Sam Harris, he's the guy who went on Bill Maher years ago, where Ben Affleck called him a racist for saying that saying that there's a problem with Islamic terrorism. It was viral, millions of views on it. Anyway, so that's Sam Harris. I've kind of been following him since then. Really interesting guy. But he actually had Sam Bankman-Fried on his podcast about 13 months ago, so at the end of 2021. And as I was listening to, or getting ready for this show today, I actually went back and I listened to that podcast. So I listened to about an hour of Sam Bankman-Fried talking on the Sam Harris podcast. So I'm gonna try to get all of that into about 3 minutes here. But essentially, Sam Bankman-Fried, he's 29 years old. His parents are Stanford professors. He pretty much lived this privileged life, right? And he's part of what's called essential altruism. That's the community that he's a part of. So what he was going around saying, and obviously this isn't true, but what he was going around saying is that I want to get as rich as I possibly can. And then once I'm that rich, I want to give it all away. And that community, that thought is called essential altruism, EA. That's what the community is called, and that's kind of what Sam Harris's podcast was about. But in creating this cryptocurrency platform, essentially of what he did with FTX, he criticized on the podcast other cryptocurrency platforms because he said that they weren't ethical, that they weren't being regulated, and he made a comment about, sometimes they're losing $1 million a day. Well, he he just lost billions of dollars for his investors. So essentially, this is like the typical Ponzi scheme. This is the best way that I can explain it. A typical Ponzi scheme. So not only did he have FTX cryptocurrency exchange, but he had all these other companies. One of them was called like Alameda Research. I believe he was a part owner, but I think his girlfriend was actually the principal owner of that. And what he was doing is this Alameda company and other companies like it were taking really risky bets, financial risky bets on different cryptocurrencies. And the way they were paying for those is money that would come in through FTX exchange was going to pay for the risky bets from the Alameda and the other companies. So when those risky bets didn't pay off, that's when everything crashed down. What's important to note about Sam Bankman-Fried is that not only was he up until recently, he was worth, at 29 years old, he was worth $22 billion. 6 weeks ago, so not that long ago, 6 weeks ago, he was on the cover of Forbes magazine and he was called the next Warren Buffett. So his fall from grace is absolutely just so quick and so crazy, and how no one caught on, it has to be just an unbelievably suspicious thing. He was also, leading up to the midterms, the number two contributor to the Democrat Party. So he donated $38 million to Democrat-run PACs in order to fund progressive candidates. After George Soros, he was the top Democrat donor. So the important question to ask, and the way he was getting his money was from these fraudulent investments, from FTX cryptocurrency exchange, that he was doing strange things and seemingly illegal things with money. So the question that I think we all have to ask is, how many Democrat candidates, how many elections, how many of those races were won that were funded by this fraudulent money? That's an important question to ask. Now that the Republicans have control of Congress, hopefully these are some of the questions that they're going to ask. It's also important to note that within the last couple months, Sam Bankman-Fried, he had private meetings with two different private meetings with Biden's top advisor in the White House, and he also has done many different benefits with Bill Clinton. So obviously, a lot of so Bill Clinton, let me say, he doesn't have a great track record of talking about like new entrepreneurs and investors and philanthropists, people who are into giving to charity. If you think about it, Bill Clinton was big on Elizabeth Holmes, Jeffrey Epstein, and now Sam Bankman-Fried. So the next time that Bill Clinton really props up some new young investor who's donating a lot of money, just assume that there's something shady behind it, because Bill Clinton doesn't have a great track record. So, well, now that all these people have lost, billions of dollars just evaporated, this is going to end up being bigger than Enron. That's how much money is going to end up being lost by investors and customers, more than Enron. So obviously, a lot of these people, as soon as they filed bankruptcy, obviously attorneys started to file class action lawsuits. And what's interesting is that they're not just filing class action lawsuits against Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, but also a lot of their sponsors. So here's the people who were essentially doing commercials and brand ambassadors for FTX: Steph Curry, Shaquille O'Neal, Tom Brady, Giselle, and Larry David. There were more, but these are the ones who are being named specifically in the class action lawsuit. Let's see if we have any questions or comments on that. Let's see. Nope, we don't. So so I think it's just interesting. So my guess is that Sam Bankman-Fried, he's still free right now. He's living in the Bahamas, and he isn't in custody right now with anything. But he is. It's likely that every three-letter agency is going to be descending on him, and you would expect some criminal charges, that when billions of dollars just evaporate, that you would assume that there are some levels of fraud there. We have to ask, has he already paid off the people who might be the ones investigating him? So we'll definitely keep on that story, because Sam Bankman-Fried is probably going to go down as the biggest con man in the United States history with how much money he stole. So I wanted to see if there's any comments about Sam Bankman-Fried and cryptocurrency, but I think it's an important case to talk about. Also, we had the final sentencing hearing for Darrell Brooks. So Darrell Brooks, we've talked about him a lot on this case, that on this show, because he was the Waukesha mass murderer. Last year at the Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, he drove his red Ford SUV for absolutely no reason into the Christmas parade. He injured 62, killed 6, including at least 1 child. He hit members of the Dancing Grannies, which people always talk about. So he was convicted a couple weeks ago of all 76 charges. So now it came to the sentencing, which was this week. And, really the only thing that we were kind of interested to see what was going to happen, because he was already convicted, is how the sentencing was going to play out. Here's what I mean by that. So there's a couple different ways that people can be sentenced. Let's say, so I think Darrell Brooks, 6 of the charges that he faced were life sentences, because he killed 6 people. So each one, let's say each life sentence is, I don't know, let's just say 20 years. It's not until you die. It's 20, 25, 30 years. So let's say the life sentence is 20 years. Well, if you have 6 of those, typically what happens is that those are served concurrently, meaning at the same time. Meaning, if you start on November 20th of 2022, all of those 20-year sentences, you're going to serve them all at the same time. So in 20 years, the individual can get out. So whether you have, if it's concurrent, whether you have 1 life sentence of 20 years or 50, it's the same 20-year block. So you're doing 20 years, right? But what the prosecutors argued for, they argued, hey, this crime was absolutely so heinous that it would be disrespectful to the victims to kind of lump them all together. That's saying, well, we're just going to give him the 120 or 25-year sentence that, the victims actually deserve more. And the prosecutor asked the judge, hey, to show how heinous this was and how much the victims' lives actually mattered, the prosecutor asked that they be conserved, that the sentences be served consecutively, essentially stacked on top of each other, one at a time. And when the judge did the sentence this week, that's exactly what she did. She sentenced him consecutively on all these charges. I think it ends up to somewhere over 1,000 years. And, this was really just a symbolic move by the judge to essentially say, this behavior is not acceptable, and this is what you're going to get for it. So Darrell Brooks got over 1,000 years, which, I think this is, cases like his are one good reason to have the death penalty. But if not, this is the absolute next best thing. They also had some of the victims or the victim's family come and talk at the sentencing hearing. And, there's one victim whose mother died in this horrible crash. I think, I'll put a link to the video in the comments section after the show. But it's really just an important statement where his biggest problem, besides the fact that his mother died, and one of the biggest problems he had with Darrell Brooks, and he was very emotional about it, is he said that at some point, Darrell Brooks, during the trial, he said that he had a clear conscience. He had a clear conscience about this. And this gentleman said, you are a monster, you are a demon. He said, how can you have a clear conscience about what happened? And it was things like that, statements like that from Darrell Brooks, not just what he did, but his attitude and the things that he said about having a clear conscience and how the court was against him. I think it's things like that absolutely 100% factored in to him getting the consecutive sentences. Let's see. CRU says that man was mentally ill. I don't think he was fit to stand trial. I think he was nuts when he did it. He had a history. Yeah, so that's a really good point. So he actually did go through a psychological evaluation to determine whether or not he's fit to stand trial. And yes, Mr. Brooks absolutely has mental illness. That's another thing I was going to say, is that both his mother and his grandmother testified during the sentencing on his behalf via Zoom. I watched both of those testimonies, and neither the mother or the grandmother were trying to defend Darrell Brooks or saying it was okay what he did, but essentially they talked about his mental health, how he had bipolar disorder and other things, and that was the reason for that. He's not an evil person; it's this mental illness. So no, I don't think anyone disputes that Darrell Brooks is mentally ill. But mentally ill is different from being competent to stand trial. So really, all they're looking at when it comes to being competent to stand trial is, do you understand the charges against you? Now, there's more to it. It's the McNaughton test is what is given. There's different factors to that. But, base level, essentially, it's, do you have the capacity to understand the charges against you? So if you understand the charges against you, then you are competent to stand trial. So again, the McNaughton test has a little bit more to it than that, but that's a pretty one sentence version of what they're actually looking for there. And he was. He actually represented himself in this case. He didn't do a great job, but even watching a few minutes and some of the questions that he was asking and some of the objections, he clearly understood the charges against him. Not a legal scholar, but he clearly understood the charges against him. And that's when you say that you're going to be your own attorney, and he had to go through hearings in order to make that happen. But he basically had to acknowledge that he's competent to stand trial. Not only did he have to show that he was competent to stand trial, so he made the argument earlier in the case that he was competent to stand trial and competent enough to be his own defense attorney. So he was competent to stand trial, even though, yes, he absolutely is 100% mentally ill. Let's see. Any other comments on that? He may have, Crafty says, he may have mental illness, but not severe enough to know right from wrong. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Do you know right from wrong? Can you understand the charges that you have against you? So yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I do think that it was the right thing to do for the judge to find that he was competent to stand trial. Now, let's say he wasn't competent to stand trial. Well, then what happens then? So not being competent to stand trial, if that would have happened kind of at the beginning of the case, it's not that, okay, you're not competent, you go free. No, that isn't what happens. If the prosecution can show that the individual is dangerous, which killing 6 people and injuring 62 more, that would be pretty easy to do. Essentially, what would have happened if he wasn't competent to stand trial is he would have gone into some type of a mental health institution. He would not have been free, and he basically would have been held there, given treatment until he was found competent. Now, that could be 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. He could be there forever. And then once he was found, so just being found not competent doesn't give you a get out of jail free card. You would just have to be in a mental institution or some other treatment facility where you're essentially in custody. It's not jail, and you're there until you are competent to stand trial. And if you're never competent to stand trial, you never get out. So that's essentially what would have happened. Now, had his defense been not guilty by reason of insanity or temporary insanity, had that been the legal theory behind his defense, and then after that, if he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, well, then at that point, yes, absolutely, then he might be able to be free. But that was not his legal defense. That was not the legal strategy that he undertook. Let's see. CRU, I'm saying he was not competent when he ran them over. Okay, so CRU, let's delve deep into that a little bit. So not competent when he ran them over. So a couple pieces of evidence would basically be in contrast to that. And it's essentially, so if he wasn't competent, so once he crashed into all those people, if he just stopped and he stood there and he waited for police and, he was confused about what had happened and didn't know where he was, and he was having a disassociation where he was, up here looking down at his body, driving the car. I think we can go down that road, but no. After the crash, what he did is he ran from the scene and he was actually ringing people's doorbells, trying to get people to take him inside because he was hiding from police. So so after he did the crash, after he committed these crimes, he had the knowledge, he had the intent, he had the knowledge that he did something wrong because he fled, and he had the intent to actively try to get away from police officers. So even though he's mentally ill, 100% he's mentally ill, he's a crazy person, he knew what he did was wrong because because he ran from the scene. So I think it would have been I think this is why, especially like the initial legal defense just didn't go with this, because it's very easy to see that in the moments after the crash, he was making conscious decisions to get away from police officers. Moments in trading. Lori Daybell Vallow was recently restored and declared competent to stand trial after 2 years of not being competent to stand trial. Absolutely. Moments in trading. Thank you so much. And I've got to say, the Lori Vallow case, we haven't really covered it on the show, but that's kind of like my guilty pleasure. Like, I love the Lori Vallow case. It's a horrible, sad case, but anything that has to do with like religious maniacs and cults, I just think it is so interesting. So thank you for bringing that up. I think on the next show, I'll do a recap of the Lori Vallow case, because me and my wife, we watch 48 Hours and 60 Minutes, and anytime there's a new show on Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, I have to watch it. It's just like, it is like junk food for the brain. I absolutely think that case is so interesting. CRU, don't mean to argue, just sharing thoughts. I didn't take it as an argument, and I appreciate the pushback and the thoughts. So again, sometimes I'm not seeing things correctly, and sometimes there are definitely subject matter experts on the live here who know more than me about different things. So I CRU, I absolutely appreciate the back and forth. That's the kind of discussion and debate that I really like, that I really think is interesting. So thank you. So I know that we're getting into Thanksgiving here this week, and I hope that everyone has a good and safe Thanksgiving. And one of the things that you have around Thanksgiving is, a lot of times you have some downtime. Maybe you're traveling to visit family, but there could be a little bit of downtime. So I just want to encourage everyone to try to do something positive. Go for a run, read a book, reconnect with family and kids. If you are interested in reading a book, I just want to give a book recommendation really quick. So last week, I just finished Andy Ngo's, NGO, Angie Ngo's book. It's called Unmasked. It's essentially Andy Ngo is a journalist who goes out, and he became famous and infamous during the summer riots of 2020. He would basically document, film, and take pictures of Antifa while they were rioting through the city and destroying towns all over the country. But he was mostly in the Portland area. He got beat up and attacked and suffered really serious injuries, after he was being a journalist and documenting a lot of the terrorism that they were doing upon communities out there. He's a journalist. He still does this work. He's written a book about it. It's called Unmasked. It's really good. And just one thing about it, a lot of people say that, he's probably exaggerating. He has an agenda. He was attacked by these people. So how do we know what he's saying is true? And I just want to put out there, so there is one chapter in the book, and I was thinking that too as I was reading it. I think he's a really good writer and journalist. I've been following him for a while, but I'm like, how much of this stuff is actually real? And then it came to one chapter in the book where he talks about a couple years ago, I think a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, there were wildfires in California, and some people in the right-wing media and in the mainstream media were blaming Antifa. We're saying it was these Antifa terrorists who were, starting these wildfires. So Andy Ngo, he did an investigation, and he talked to his sources, and he basically came out the other end and said, hey, there's no evidence to this. And he went on the news, and he was basically saying that, no, we shouldn't blame them for this. So, kind of what I look at when it's either a commentator or an author, if they say something, and if it's in direct, and if it hurts their narrative. So if it doesn't help their narrative, I think I'm more likely to believe what they have to say. So the fact that he wrote almost an entire chapter of how Antifa was blamed for this horrible thing, but he's making the argument, don't blame them, they didn't do it, we have to be honest. I like that kind of stuff when it comes to authors and people that I listen to. So Andy Ngo's Unmasked. I think it's a real interesting thing to do. And because it's Thanksgiving, I just want to give a couple of ideas to people to, in case there isn't enough to argue about with your crazy Uncle Jim at the dinner table, here's a couple things that, just to make sure everyone knows. Let's say, hang on, Adam Golson, objectivity in journalism feels rare these days. It absolutely does, Adam. Thank you so much. I agree 100%. But in case there isn't enough to argue about, at the dinner table on Thanksgiving, I just want to throw out a couple different ideas. So Trump announced that he was going to run for president. He did that this past Tuesday. So I know a lot of people have thoughts on that. I think that would be interesting. The Republicans are going after Hunter Biden. There was a press conference yesterday where Republican members in Congress said that they have some solid evidence from whistleblowers that Joe Biden was involved with Hunter Biden's business dealings while Joe Biden was the vice president. So we'll have to see if there are going to be any criminal charges from that. I think it's also fun to do like a compare and contrast. Who's more competent, Joe Biden or John Fetterman? And then whoever wins that, let's see who's more competent, them or Herschel Walker. So I think these are fun kind of games to play. Also, Elon Musk, has basically, Twitter's been, a lot of people from Twitter have been working remotely for a really long time. And Elon Musk just came out and essentially said everybody has to come back to work. So a lot of people are upset and irritated with that. One of the interesting things that Elon Musk said is that, he's like, in the other companies I have, Tesla and SpaceX, he said there are some people who actually do work remote. He said, but it's rare and it's on a case-by-case basis. Elon Musk said that, he believes that working remotely, that the communication just isn't as good. It's more difficult. He said, so you have to be such an exceptional employee to overcome that. So he said, this is going to be an exception for exceptional people to continue the remote work. So a lot of people are irritated and pissed off about that. I also want to say that our country, it's not a perfect country, but there are no racist laws on the books now, which is a good thing. And we actually have a lot to be thankful for. I just want to point to what's happening in Iran. So not long ago in Iran, a 16-year-old girl was arrested by police officers because she violated their insane, ridiculous dress code. She was showing too much skin. She was arrested by Iranian police, and 16-year-old girl, she actually died in police custody. Since then, there were all kinds of protests and riots, which is an absolutely great thing, because it seems like some of these people that are kind of waking up that this religious these religious maniacs who run this country and impose all these insane laws on us, maybe it's not a good thing. So there were all kinds of protests over the last couple weeks and months in Iran, and recently one of the courts in Iran has found a lot of these people guilty and sentenced 15,000 of them to death. So whether or not Iran is actually going to kill 15,000 people or not, protesters who were out there protesting this horrible death. So they've actually sentenced them to death. Whether or not it'll happen, we'll see. I think the outcry from the international community would just be so extreme if they did this, so we'll see. But just know there are places in the world where, not everybody does have equal rights. And I just want to point to Iran. So we do have a lot to be thankful about. And with that, I'm going to sign off. And I hope that everyone has a great, happy, and safe Thanksgiving. And if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to the channel and have a good weekend. Thank you.